Welcome to Say My On. Yeah, God did that.
Episode 3 The Eye, Part 1 Millions of Parts and Pieces. The human eye is one of the most amazing structures on this planet. It is the second most complex organ of the body, just behind the brain. It consists of over 100 million parts, all in something about the size of a ping pong ball, functioning together so that you may see the world around you. It is so amazing in its function that there is still a great deal that we do not understand about how it works. In this episode, we are going to focus on the necessary components of the eyeball for its function. In so doing, we will observe how all these various components come together to form a functional eye, and how, in the absence of any component, and even more so in multitude, then the eye would not be able to work at all. This is a concept called irreducible complexity. This basically means that the systems must be present as a more or less complete package in order for it to work at all. This is important because these systems could not have evolved one step at a time and be beneficial to the fitness of the organism, but must be present in whole to be functional, i.e., séméon. Irreducible systems are strong evidence for the work of God, the Creator. Here we have a typical human eye, as you may have seen in the mirror, and an anatomical view you may have seen in textbooks. Now let's go over some of the most visual parts that you may be familiar with. As we go over these parts, we will also talk a little about what they do, but you should also keep in mind that many parts have many functions in the system. Our goal is to hit the bigger points, to see the greater functionality as a whole. Part 1, the eyelids. Responsible for a whole multitude of things. They act as a barrier to things entering the eye. By closing them, you can keep light from entering the eye so you can sleep, but also to protect from exposure to a very bright light source that may damage the eye. They contain glands that generate lubricating substances that keep the eye clean and moist. And by blinking, they adequately distribute these tear films across the surface to maintain your eye health. Number 2, the sclera, which is the white of the eye. This covers 80% of the eyeball, but the interesting thing is you only see about 1/6 of the whole eyeball on average. It is white on the outside, but brown on the inside. And a thin layer called the episclera lies on top of the sclera and has tiny blood vessels to provide nutrients. The white surface of the sclera has grooves that allow for the attachment of the eye muscles so that the eye can move to see different objects. Number 3, the conjunctiva, which is a transparent layer of skin tissue covering the sclera and the inside of the eyelid. This is the tissue that generates mucus and tears to help lubricate and protect the eye, to protect from microorganisms and debris, and has immune system function applications as well. Number 4, the iris, the pretty part of the eye, which is unique to every single person. This is the colored part of the eye and contains 2 thin layers of smooth muscle. The pupillary sphincter, which is a circular muscle which shrinks the size of a hole, and the dilator, which is a circular muscle that expands the size of the hole, which work together to control the size of the pupil. Number 5, the pupil, though, which is not an object in and of itself, but rather the hole in the center of the iris. The pupil appears black because the light that enters the eye is absorbed and is not reflected back out. Through changing the size of the pupil, the iris is able to control the amount of light that enters the eye so that the system is adaptive to its environment, allowing more light in when it is darker and reducing the amount of light when it is brighter so that the system is not overloaded. This function also is important in the accommodation reflex, which is the ability to shift focus from near to far objects and vice versa, far to near. Number 6, the cornea, is a clear protective layer that sits over the iris. This acts along with the sclera to provide additional protection from foreign objects and microorganisms. It is the initial interface for light and bends the light as it passes through it, aiding in focus. It also filters out a large amount of UV, which is very damaging to the internal structures of the eye. The cornea is the only part of the body, interestingly enough, that does not have its own blood supply and gets its oxygen straight from the air. It is also the fastest healing tissue of the body, allowing it to be repaired quickly when it is scratched, often in as little as 24 hours. Number 7, the retina, is the light-sensitive layer that covers the inside rear surface of the eye. It contains rod cells, about 90 million of them, which detect black, white, and more than 500 shades of gray, and are responsible for mostly the peripheral vision system. They respond primarily to light intensity and brightness, and function well in dim light. The retina also contains 3 types of cone cells, about 5 million cells, which detect red, green, and blue light waves, and combined they allow the detection of almost 7 million different colors. These function well in bright light. Cone cells are also not present in equal ratios as you might think they would be. For instance, it's 65% red, 30% green, and around 5% blue on average. Cones are concentrated in the center of the retina called the macula, and especially so in a small depression in the macula called the fovea, which gathers about 80 to 90% of the visual information and allows for high visual acuity. The retina contains about 1.5 million nerve cells that collect and transport all of this information to the brain. Number 8, the choroid, is the layer between the sclera and the retina. This is the primary vascular layer of the eye and delivers the bulk of nutrients and oxygen to the retina. This layer also reflects red light when extreme amounts of light are present, which causes the red eye effect that you see in photographs sometimes. Number 9, the eye muscles control the movement of the eyeball in the eye socket. Now, we didn't mention the eye socket before, but remember, you got to have some place to put your eye, so you need an eye socket. The eyeball is controlled by 6 muscles: the superior and the inferior rectus, which move the eye up and down; the medial and the lateral rectus, which move the eye left and right; the superior and the inferior obliques, which roll the eye inward and outward. Remember, moms, when your children roll their eyes at you, they're actually practicing the movement of their superior and their inferior obliques, as allowed for by God. Now, without these 6 muscles working in unison, the eye would be fixed in place, and the head would have to move to focus on different objects. And what's interesting too is these are the fastest moving muscles in your body. They function in as little as 1/100th of a second. Number 10, the lens, is a transparent structure located behind the iris. The lens is held in place by the suspensory ligaments, known as the fibers of Zen, to the ciliary body and muscle. This system allows for the lens curvature and thickness to be changed for the system to focus on objects at different distances. Number 11, the optic nerve. As I mentioned back in the retina section, the retina contains around 1.5 million nerve cells. These cells are bundled together in what is known as the optic nerve bundle, or also as cranial nerve 2. These nerve cells transfer all of the information collected by the rods and cones of the eyes to the visual cortex of the brain to be processed, so all this information can be used to allow you to interact with your environment. Keep in mind that sufficient slack must also be present in the optic nerve bundle to allow for the movement of the eyeball in the eye socket. Number 12, the vitreous body. Filled with vitreous humor. And we call it humor because it's a body fluid and body fluids are funny. Which is a viscous jelly, though, like liquid that fills the area between the retina and the lens. This helps keep the shape of the eye, which is required for correctly focusing the light on the receptors of the retina. And it makes up 80% of the volume of the eye. And the nature of the liquid in clarity and viscosity is critical, since all the light that enters the eye passes through the vitreous humor, which has a unique refractive index of its own. This means that it also bends the light that passes through it, which must be compensated by all the other aspects of the eyeball anatomy. This brief overview of the major parts of the eye that have to be present and work together gives you an idea of the amazing complexity of the human eye. Now look at it this way. There are about 100,000 functional genes, as we understand so far, in the human genome. Around 7,500 genes are involved in developing and regulating the retina. That's almost 8%. In the next episode, we will discuss the amazing brain side of the visual system and how the miracle of vision is truly a gift of God the Creator. Until then, ponder this. Quote, to suppose that the eye, with all its inimitable contrivance for adjusting the focus to different distances, for admitting different amounts of light, and for the correction of spherical and chromatic aberration, could have been formed by natural selection seems, I freely confess, absurd in the highest possible degree. Charles Darwin in The Origin of the Species. We are truly blessed to see firsthand the work of God, the Father, the Creator, in the world around us.
Say my on. Yeah, God did that.
So, the eye, I mean, that's a great scientific view of it. The concept of sight blows my mind. I mean, we take the brains that he gave us and we try to recreate machines that can do what the eye can do. That's amazing in its own right. But look at it this way: the concept of sight is a creation of God. Like the whole idea of visual imagery, this thing that is just part of our everyday life. Like, what does something look like? What does something smell like? What does something feel like? He started from scratch with all of that.
Yeah. It's weird because light is a very tiny part of the electromagnetic spectrum that's out there. So we see visible light, but there's a huge range of other things. I mean, there's so much that goes into what we see and why that's relevant. And it could have been anything. If it was random, it could have been anywhere else.
Exactly.
It's absolutely nuts.
Exactly. Irreducible complexity, I feel, may be the biggest logical argument against most of what Darwinian evolution as a creation mechanism supports.
You'll like episode 4.
Okay.
Episode 4 really steps it up into the whole craziness aspect.
God did that. All right, love it. Thank you, Mike. Anything else on that? Pretty amazing, right? All right. Let's go back into 2 Samuel then. We are going to attempt to finish up 3 and probably go through 4 tonight. 4 is really not groundbreaking from our perspective because the concepts there we've kind of already addressed in our previous discussions of David. But let's go to the end section of 3 here. We had Joab and Abner and the conflict last time. We discussed extensively the self-centered motivation behind pretty much everything Abner did. But then we also ended up seeing that in Joab, right? And so we can easily see that self-centeredness is not just for the bad guys. We have to be careful of that as the good guys, and that's what we're going to call ourselves because we're aligned with God. But just because we're aligned with God doesn't mean that the end justifies the means. It doesn't mean that we get to make our own decisions. And such a stark contrast here between Joab and David and how they approach things. I spent a lot of time today thinking about David and just his willingness to sit still and only do what God tells him to do. Not feeling like he has to take the initiative to right or wrong or do anything other than what God tells him to do. And that's what we don't see in Joab. We certainly didn't see that in Abner. We're not going to see that in the brothers that we're going to meet here today in chapter 4, which are going to meet a horrific end. The righteous have rules to follow just like the unrighteous do. And it would behoove us to remember that, I think. So that's the setup. Starting in verse 28 of chapter 3. Afterward, when David heard it, talking about the murder, he said, "My kingdom and I are guiltless before the Lord forever of the blood of Abner, the son of Ner. Let it rest on the head of Joab and on all his father's house, and let there never fail to be in the house of Joab one who has a discharge or is a leper, who leans on a staff or falls by the sword, or who lacks bread." So Joab and Abishai, his brother, killed Abner because he had killed their brother, Asahel, at Gibeon in the battle. Then David said to Joab and to all the people who were with him, "Tear your clothes, gird yourselves with sackcloth, and mourn for Abner." And King David followed the coffin. So they buried Abner in Hebron, and the king lifted up his voice and wept at the grave of Abner, and all the people wept. And the king sang a lament over Abner and said, "Should Abner die as a fool dies? Your hands were not bound, nor your feet put into fetters. As a man falls before wicked men, so you fell." Then all the people wept over him again. Abner's death was a wrongful murder, while Asahel's, though tragic if you cared about such things, it was in the face-to-face battle with a known enemy. It's not the same thing. Even if you want to take eye for an eye and apply it to vengeance, which actually is not what it's meant for, it still doesn't match up that way. So what about that sticks out to you?
So, I mean, in terms of the death of Asahel, it's not premeditated. You can make the argument it's not intentional. It's just something that he's forced into. This is, by Joab, is very much an intentional action, done in a very wrong way.
Yeah. Deceitful.
And very deceitful. He hey, come back to Hebron under the flag of peace, and we will discuss further the things you have to do, and then take him aside in the gate and stab him there. Very deceitful. If it had been like Abner had told Asahel, "Hey, come give me a hug," and when Asahel got close, he stabbed him in the stomach. That's not what happened at all. So I think Joab is definitely very deceitful in all this activity. And I think he's trying to justify doing wrong by the end result being good, that the enemy of David is dead. And I think what we see here is how those that try to do the good service of the Lord going about the wrong direction tend to cause way more damage than they intended.
Yeah.
And I believe that's why David goes through this cycle of everything that's happening there. He's not only is he concerned that Abner was killed, he's more concerned about how Abner was killed. And this, should Abner die as a fool, a lot of people use this as justification of the outside the gate argument, where it's more of, he says it right there, is the man that falls before wicked men. Yeah. Is what that's talking about. And
what Mike's referencing there in the commentary searches, for some reason, most of the commentators that I love and read a lot, they really want this murder to have happened outside the gate. They want to whitewash that part of it, and we just don't see that in the text. There's no reason to have him come back from a mile or 2.5 miles away, wherever that pool was, to do it if you're going to do it outside the gate. It actually said it took him aside in the gate, which is language that really speaks to, that's the place of business. There were in the walls, there were often rooms right there where official business was transacted, official city business and things like that, business deals with officials and witnesses. It was kind of like taking them into a courtroom, kind of. To murder. Yeah. Yeah. What I love is the consistency of David. When he sees wrong, he just calls it wrong. The cynics would say, well, he's putting on a show to keep from having a big war here or something. a dignitary from your enemy has been murdered in your gates. Well, you put on a show of mourning and you blame. People cynics would say, well, he's making this guy the fall guy. And that's not it at all. He is truly mourning over what has happened. He doesn't like it. Even if it benefits him, he doesn't like it when people do the wrong thing. James?
And you can't even say a dignitary from his enemy because he had a pact with him. He made truce.
That's right. Exactly. And, that's what really, David was going to hate it anyway. He was not going to support this action no matter what. But the truth is, one of the things that we saw when Joab and the guys came back last time, they heard people saying that David had sent Abner away in peace. So this is really an affront to David specifically.
He would have been under like the idea of diplomatic protection.
Yeah.
Right? Like that was.
Yeah. Everything is wrong. It's just blind emotional vengeance.
Yeah.
Is really what it is.
So then it'd be an act of treason.
It was. It definitely was.
It is arguably an act of treason. And, frankly, David is gracious enough not to have Joab killed at the moment.
That's a pretty hefty curse, though. Let there be nobody in his family without a, what is it?
Without a discharge.
Without a discharge or leprosy.
Or hunger.
Or hunger. That's a pretty serious curse over the family there moving forward. You can see the whole family going, oh,
man, what did we do?
Yeah.
That's how hell got off easy.
It matters what the followers of a leader do. Okay? Just to put it in a wildly different context, we had an issue here one time where somebody in leadership, somebody that I was close to, did something stupid, something that they knew better than to do, something that I wish they hadn't done, something they now wish they hadn't done. And because I was really close to this person, once I found out about it, because it had been an ongoing thing for a little while, once I found out about it, God just made me realize immediately, it was like everybody assumes that you know and have been letting this happen because that's one of your close people. And so I had to do what I don't like to do. I had to confront it kind of publicly in front of, I did it with the Wednesday night crowd, not a Sunday morning. But I had to make sure that people knew that I hadn't known, because that could have left a mark on how people saw me, and it could have kept them from being able to be taught by me, and I would understand that. If I had known about that and had let it go, then that would have been a real mark against my leadership. And that's something David is doing here. He is distancing himself from everything that was just done, not because it was politically expedient. David doesn't care about politics. He is very faithful. He understands that the anointing to be king is his. So he's not worried about losing his position. I think he's worried about that black mark going all the way back to God through him, from his servant to him to God. Because he's a representative of God, that guy's a representative of him. And that's how lives are ruined many times. That's how a lot of people are turned away from the faith. In the other job that I have, it's astounding how many people that I have conversations with there who have turned from church and from God because somebody in the church hurt them. And in their mind, those people are representing God just because they say his name. Yeah. Just because those people attach his name to themselves. They see them as his literal representatives in all things. And when they get mistreated by them, they turn from God. I think that's what David is concerned with here.
We have to be very, very careful how we represent the Lord in all situations. The ends never justify the means in that. And our walk is truly a testimony of the Lord. And if we do poorly in that walk, and when we stumble, we have to take ownership of our stumbling, and seek forgiveness and correct the wrong in every way possible. And there are some things you can't fix. It's just done. But I do find it interesting that also David does not remove Joab from service. He leaves him where he is. So I think there's a lot of forgiveness shown in that, and how that is carrying forward.
And where has David gotten the concept of forgiveness from?
From God.
From God, because he needed a lot of grace.
Again, we talked about this when he let Abner go in peace, that it was reflective of his own problematic walk that he had. And, he also seems that same problematic walk in Joab. Mm-hmm. And Joab let his feelings get the better of him here.
Which is exactly what David had done. A couple of years ago, he's living with the Philistines.
Yep, exactly.
Making raves over there. Any other thoughts on that? 35. And when all the people came to persuade David to eat food while it was still day, David took an oath, saying, God do so to me and more also, if I taste bread or anything else till the sun goes down. Now all the people took note of it, and it pleased them, since whatever the king did pleased all the people. For all the people and all Israel understood that that day that it had not been the king's intent to kill Abner, the son of Ner. All the people took note of it. Parents, remember this. You lament the fact that your kids don't pay attention to you. They're paying attention. They just don't like some of the stuff you tell them to do, so they act like they didn't hear it. They hear every word. They see every action. And to go back to the previous point, you should be representing God in that household. And so if your actions don't line up, see, that's the other conversation I hear a lot in the other job. And we have some people here in this fellowship who came from hypocritical Christian households, and they turned from God for a long time before he was able to soften their heart enough to come back and just try church again. Parents, be careful that you're representing God well. You're not going to do everything right, of course. But you should be seeking his counsel all the time. You should be equipping yourself with truth so that you know how to act. You should be led by God in all that you do. And they should take note of that. If you do it, they'll know it. And they'll give you some grace when you do something stupid. And they won't blame God for it, because they'll know you're trying. And that's important. There's a humility in that kind of leadership that's really important. A humble leader can get by with a mistake every now and then, because people trust their intentions. And parents, bosses, this kind of goes back to the stuff from 1 Peter we've been looking at. Submission up the chain of command all the way to God, so that we never misrepresent him and draw people away. We're supposed to draw people towards him, not away. And that's what David's doing. Is he doing this to solidify the love of the people for him?
No, I think that's a beneficial byproduct.
Yeah. That's not his intent at all. He's come out of darkness into light, and he's just going to follow God no matter what. He's just going to do the right thing no matter what, and he's going to let the chips fall wherever they do. And he's okay with that. That's what we see later on when one of his kids turns on him and leads a coup against him. And he's getting chased out of town, and there's this one guy who's like, hey, let me go kill these guys for you. He's like, no, let it go. God's got me. And if this is not supposed to work out, God can stop it. And maybe it is supposed to work out this way for some reason. Maybe this is how God's choosing to bring glory. And there's such a faith in that attitude of just yoking yourself to God and letting him lead, no matter what.
Yeah, life's not clean.
No, it's not.
It gets rough and tumble. Yeah.
Something interesting to me here, everybody knew that the slaying of Abner was done in an underhanded way. And God makes the important distinction that they took note of David's demeanor and realized that he hadn't been behind it. Which I take to mean that there was probably discussion about whether he had been behind it or not. Or else there's no reason to mention it here. The people were uneasy because of what happened. a good leader dispels confusion. There have been times just in my leadership here where I've had to come before you and say, hey, that was stupid. And that was wrong. I'm sorry. Made a mistake. Sometimes it seems easier to not admit that and to just roll past it and, okay, I'll do it right next time, and that'll make up for it. But anytime you don't speak, as a leader, anytime you don't speak, you leave room for the flesh and the enemy to fill out the facts of the story and create a story that may not even exist. And that's not good. That's not good. That's what I tell couples all the time when I'm talking to couples and trying to help them learn how to communicate. A lot of times it's just, if you don't know how to communicate, a lot of times you just don't. Like you don't even try. And so then you just leave and go to your separate corners and nobody says anything. And when nobody says anything, then the other person is creating the narrative in their head that they think is true. And that's always going to go negative. Because if you're fighting, it's not like you're thinking positive about the other person. That's always going to go negative. So use words. Communicate with words.
I think only positive thoughts about my wife.
I know that. And we praise you for it.
I don't know what else you want me to say there. So.
I'm afraid for you to say anything else there, actually, honestly.
I did make a note here in Proverbs 14:4.
Okay.
Where no oxen are, the trough is clean, but much increase comes from the strength of an ox.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it talks about how life's not a clean walk, and things get dirty. But what David does is, I think what we're supposed to do is to be very open and public about the discourse.
Yeah.
Even when David makes his own mistake, he's very open and public about it.
Mm-hmm. Eventually.
Yeah. But we see what wrong comes from him not being open and public.
No doubt. Yes.
One thing I love here is David's peace about everything too. He's not.
Yeah. Yeah. This could be for a leader a really tumultuous, disorienting thing. Like this could be the crumbling of a situation. And yet he's able to just keep doing the right thing, trusting that God will work it out however it's supposed to work out, because he's just at peace with where he is with God. He's made his decisions ahead of time, which I think is really important. David is really good at this point in his life of not leading by reaction. He has made thoughtful decisions in his quiet time with God, honestly, as to who he's going to be and what he's going to do. And he's just resting. And that's a good practice for us.
Amen.
38. Then the king said to his servants, do you not know that a prince and a great man has fallen this day in Israel? And I am weak today, though anointed king, and these men, the sons of Zeruiah, are too harsh for me. The Lord shall repay the evildoer according to his wickedness. That almost to me sounds like a lament. That maybe God has told him he can't kill the wicked guy in this story. You know, because David's reaction is usually pretty swift on somebody that's that far out of God's will. And maybe he wanted to.
Yeah, and it's kind of strange that there wasn't really any like immediate corporal punishment as far as something that grievous.
Yep.
Now, I find it interesting too that David seems like he had a lot of respect for Abner, even though he didn't like him.
Yep, he did.
Yeah,
he did. We talked about that last time.
Mm-hmm.
Between all of these guys, really, there is that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think this gentleman here brought up an interesting point about David didn't hold Joab accountable for this murder, and that started a pattern of injustice in David's life when his son rapes his daughter.
That's right.
He doesn't hold him accountable, causes Absalom to raise up against David because he didn't do anything about it.
Yep.
Absalom kills his half-brother. Then Joab again misleads David and encourages him to bring Absalom back into the kingdom.
That's right.
And he starts undermining David. So it's, though he's a man after God's heart, and he's erring on the side of grace and showing mercy, which is beautiful, God is still a God of justice. I think that that shows the imperfectness of David in another way. That
Sure.
though he was trying to err on the side of grace, he left out justice. And without justice, it causes more problems. That those who don't get justice seek revenge, right?
Yeah, we're going to see that as good a leader as I think he is for the nation. In his house, not so good, really.
Well,
He let a lot of things slide.
I think he's pretty clear there in 39 of who is the one that deals out the justice. You know, the Lord shall repay the evildoer according to his wickedness. I think is his way of saying, ain't nobody getting away with nothing. Joab will pay the price for this.
And he does.
Yeah.
Eventually.
So.
Well, he
Yeah,
also
yeah.
uses Joab to kill Uriah. Yeah. There you go.
Yeah.
I mean,
This is stuff way above our pay grade, right?
man, hey. Anybody that says that the Bible is not R-rated that has never read it.
That's right.
There's a lot of deceit and twists and murder and betrayal.
And again, what I love is that the Bible gives us a real picture of people. It gives us the flaws. It shows us the dings and the armor. You know, David's a man after God's own heart, not because he does it all right, but because he wants to do it right. He really does.
Like you said, he's humble. He
Yeah.
admits when he's wrong, and he's quick to ask for forgiveness and repent.
Yep. Once he knows he's wrong and knows God is aware he's wrong, which sometimes there's a delay in that part. But once he knows he's wrong, he runs back to God and says, I am so sorry. Please forgive me. Let me back under the shelter of your wing. You know, some of the beauty of those apologies and psalms are stunning. And some of his mistakes are stunning. How does a guy that loves God and trusts God that much, he was unwilling to go after an enemy, but really, he seems unwilling to call people an enemy unless God tells him to go get them, even.
Which is also another pattern of God.
Yeah.
Right? How many times does Israel betray
Yeah.
God and his love, and how many times do we do that?
Yeah.
And he still forgives us and still gives us another chance.
Right.
Amen.
How does a guy with that great an understanding of the nature of God and a desire to be like God end up doing some of the stuff that he did? How does that guy end up committing adultery and murder to cover up adultery and all that change?
Well, you know, I think it's interesting. A righteous man will fall down 7 times, get up 8.
Yeah, sure. Sure. He's a case study in that. And so we get to see the grace of God on display all throughout every aspect of David's life.
Which gives us hope.
That's right. Amen.
I think the reason why David was a man after God's own heart is because he kept on going back to God even after he messed up.
That's right.
I think David actually also does truly love the people around him.
Yeah.
You know, I think he's following through on that aspect of God too. I think he genuinely loves Joab. And I think he was showing love to Abner. And he's walking that walk. And I don't think he has any joy in the bloodshed that's happening.
I agree.
I mean, you hear about it even like with modern like conflicts. Guys like recognize their enemy and what they go through because they experience it as well. It's just because they're enemies doesn't mean they don't have like a genuine respect and love for one another. So when Abner falls and he understands how he fell, it's like, man, that's horrible. We may have been enemies on the battlefield, but that doesn't mean anyone deserves that.
Yeah.
It would have been interesting to be at that table when he was throwing the party for Abner, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And they sat down and they were talking and under peace. It'd been interesting to hear the war stories they were trading back and forth. You know,
Yeah, the brotherhood of warriors in this whole scenario is
the
pretty
insults he
pretty
threw at
distinct.
him when he went in and Saul was sleeping. And, you know, I wonder if he's like, I'm sorry I was so hard on you then, Abner, but you know, you were kind of silly.
I think other than Nathan, I think Abner is the only one that calls David on his sin that we see. I see how the Lord worked through bringing Avalsam back, but when David went to number Israel, it's Abner who says, don't bring the guilt on
Yeah,
Israel.
that's right.
So I think Abner is as mixed as the rest of us are.
But Abner was loyal to his king, Saul. You know, he was loyal to David once David became king, and you know, he's the one that tells him about Saul's son.
Yeah, I transposed words. Joab would call David on his sin for numbering Israel. That's what I meant to say.
Yeah, okay.
I transposed names.
There you go. All right. It's good. I was trying to figure out where I lost track of it. I'm glad you filled in that void.
You see the humility in Eric?
I was struggling there for a second.
That's good leadership, Eric. We appreciate it.
I was like, hold it here. Abner is dead. Okay, we're pretty sure Abner's dead.
David has just done what Joab should have done, what we should all do. He allowed the Word of God to set the boundaries for the scenario. Period.
Yeah.
He wasn't told to kill Joab, so he didn't. He didn't let it slide. He called it out. He made it public, as a good leader had to in that moment. Again, quite a hefty curse there. But he did not allow... I bet he was mad. I bet he was really mad at Joab, because David's a fiery guy.
Yeah.
He's a musician. He's an artist. He's an emotional guy.
I can see him.
But he's reached a point in his life where emotion does not drive him. It doesn't make him do things.
Picked up a stone, was spinning.
Yeah. he pulls out a sling. He's just looking at it, you know, like when Jesus fashioned that whip together in front of those guys, you know. I think this is really important, especially when dealing with something that is emotional. Just like the scripture says, don't lean on your own understanding. His ways are not our ways. There's a way that seems right to a man, but it leads to death. Vengeance is mine, says the Lord. I will repay. If he tells you to do something, do it. But don't assume that you have license to do it just because you perceive there's a wrong, even if you're right about that. Just because you perceive there's a wrong doesn't mean you can do whatever you think is necessary to make that wrong right.
Yeah, most definitely.
You see the difference between David at this point in his life compared to David when he was facing Goliath? He's not as headstrong. He's more...
I don't know. I think he's more like he was back then.
Yeah,
because back then, all he cared about was honoring God.
He was reliant on God in all ways when facing Goliath, and even shrugged off the notions of man for the armor and all that stuff of Saul, and he set all that aside, and he's doing the same thing here. He is seeking the will of God in the action that he's taking. You know.
So let's look at chapter 4.
How are we going to?
Yeah. Why not?
Because you're the guy that likes to be done at 7:30.
Verse 1.
Okay, verse 1.
When Saul's son heard that Abner had died in Hebron, he lost heart, and all Israel was troubled. Everybody, including Ishbosheth, knew where the real power and leadership of the nation had resided. And with that gone, he's not sure what will become of him. And the same is true for the nation. There's an understanding at the moment now that, because again, don't forget, nobody's confused. Everybody knows David is supposed to be king. Mm-hmm. Everybody. Abner acknowledged it just before he died. Everybody knows. And now they've reached that point where all of us have reached at some time in our life, where we have knowingly struck out in the wrong direction and headed quite a ways out there, and then all of a sudden realized, uh-oh, this isn't going to play out the way that I thought. It's not going to play out the way I hoped. And I've got some backtracking to do at best, or I may just be headed off a cliff. I don't know. And that's where the whole nation, other than Judah, is right now.
So do you think this sentence can be particularly reflective of the leadership of Israel, the elders? You know, because the reason why I think that's because Abner went and openly and publicly called the elders to follow David and follow him and come to David's side and do what is right before God. And then Abner gets whacked Okay, and I wonder if to some degree in the back of the other guys' minds, they're like, oh no, who are we? Okay, because that guy was on his side,
Yeah.
and he got whacked, and we have not made a profession of faith, and we're out here in the weeds.
Yeah, they've got a good, healthy fear at this moment.
Yeah.
They hitched their wagon to Abner at least 2 years ago when he sets up Ishbosheth as the leader up there. And they were willing to follow him. They put faith in Abner. Because they knew he was wrong. But they went that direction. And so then Abner comes back to them, like you said, and says, okay, we're following David now. I'm sure they were like, dodged a bullet there. And now Abner's gone.
We didn't like Ishbosheth anyways.
They don't have an intermediary anymore.
Yeah.
And yeah, I agree. I think they were worried that this was their day.
And I think actually this kind of reflects on the actions of the two brothers and their concern. I think they were concerned in trying to make a name for themselves that they felt would get them safe.
Oh, absolutely. No doubt about that.
But I think the source of that lends to the Joab having killed Abner in the way that he did. I think that's causing a ripple effect.
Yep.
And we see how that sin continually ripples, even though David has been open and dealing with it, and that the effect of it is continuing on.
I think it goes back to what you said a minute ago about what you said about doing things out of what you think you're supposed to be doing and listening to God and doing what you. Because and I agree that Joab did have the interest of Israel in mind, but he did a lot of things he did, but he wasn't called by God to do those things.
That's it.
That's
Right?
it.
He thought he was doing the right thing, but it was under man's wisdom, not God.
That's exactly right. Yep.
So,
I completely agree.
I wish I was here next week because the story of
I wish you were here next week too.
Mephibosheth, that story coming up is really interesting and showing.
Yep.
Everybody thinks David's going to have vengeance on all Saul's
That's right.
family, and here he shows such tender mercies to.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Ishbosheth is arguably thinking the exact same thing.
Right.
Like, oh man, okay, he killed Abner. Abner was the big man on the block.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Ishbosheth don't know nothing.
Right.
Okay, he can't do diddly squat. From all we can tell, he hasn't done anything other than agitate Abner, when he probably shouldn't have.
He was just Abner's mouthpiece. He was straw boss.
Yeah, exactly. So which is leads to his depression and being home in bed in the midday hours and stuff.
Here's where I want to finish up. Here's the main point, I think, of this specific piece of the story. There was no confusion as to where the anointing was. Everybody knew David was the king. Yet they willfully held back the allegiance that they should have given him. They didn't yield to the known truth and make their actions line up with their understanding. Same could be said of Israel in general throughout the Old Testament. The same could be said of us now. Whenever we hang on to something that can only have a negative impact in our lives, something that just doesn't line up with what we understand already to be the will of God for our lives, be it in a relationship or in your job or a pet sin that you're hanging on to. Sadly, most of our offenses against the Lord, who loves us so much that he died for us, are not rooted in confusion, misunderstanding, or lack of available truth. And that's to our detriment. We can always choose to follow what we know to be true. We can always choose to have a heart like David's here, where we just do the right thing. Let God handle the fallout, whether it's positive or negative. That's really of no importance. It will be what it will be. But our allegiance, our devotion, our love has to be for God and not for self. He's earned that. He deserves that. He deserves it just because he's God. Then he still chose to earn it anyway, which he didn't have to do. He could just demand it. He's so gracious, so kind. And there's so much advantage taken of that grace. I think true greatness comes from just aligning yourself with God, no matter what. Keep it that simple.
Do you think that my thought process goes back to when David made a promise to Saul to protect his descendants, and then his son is killed here, Saul's killed. So the fact that he killed the Amalekite who killed Saul, killed him, and then the brothers, he kills them. They're both from the house, they're Saul's descendants, right? He made a promise to Saul, so it's God showing David mercy and allowing these other individuals who did the killings, to be killed in order to honor David's promise.
Well, that's a deep thought, baby. I don't know. I can definitely agree with that to this extent, without even thinking about it. Remember how we saw God protect David from going to war against Saul with the Philistines. Even though he was in such a bad place, he was ready to go. And God made the Philistines reject him. So I do believe that a man after God's own heart, so long as he is acting in the knowledge of God's will, I think God does line up other things to protect him from doing something stupid.
Because I'm just thinking about David's heart, how he would feel if, knowing he couldn't do anything about that, he made a promise to Saul, and yet his hands were tied, and not being able to honor that promise in some way. Even though he couldn't stop them from being killed, his son being killed and whatnot, he didn't know it was going to happen. But yet, not being able to do anything about it too. I think he might have carried, for me, I probably carried some guilt or something about not being able to keep my word, in some way.
Yeah, I don't know.
Because it's just the contrast that he doesn't kill Joab. All this murder's going on, and he doesn't kill the one guy who was basically innocent in the whole thing. He was told to go away in peace, and then he's the one who gets off kind of not scot-free, but he doesn't die.
Well, everybody in his family is going to have a discharge or leprosy. So let's. Yeah. It's hard to wrangle grace and righteous anger. That's a real gray area logically, because grace is never going to make perfect sense logically, and so that's a tough place to be in. So again, the safe spot is to turn to God. And one of the points I'm going to make in all of this is what David has gotten really good at is asking God what to do. Not asking him to bless him in what he does, but asking God what to do. And that takes care of all of that. That takes care of the oath, any oaths that you make.
Well, arguably, David shows us exactly what to do with the righteous anger. We leave the fulfillment of that righteous anger to the Lord. For genuinely, if it is righteous anger, it is the anger of God. And he is the one that shall take vengeance, not David. And I think David fully understands that in an unusually coherent way.
Yep.
Which is why I think David is kind of surprised later, when he is allowed to continue on.
All right, we got to stop there.
Yep.
We are late. But if you are watching online, you're with us there, and you have the link to the Zoom access to the prayer meeting, please join us there. That will begin immediately. If not, we will see you Sunday. But until then, love God, love everybody else.